Your Excellency, First Lady, Honorable Ministers, members of the security organs, members from the diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Karinda Brenda. I work for the Office of the Government Spokesperson, and I'm going to be your host tonight. We are gathered here for the book launch of Intend to Deceive by Linda Melvin. Linda is a highly seasoned journalist and a widely published author of 7 books, including 3 on the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi: A People Betrayed, Conspiracy to Murder, and Intend to Deceive, which she is launching today. Over the past 28 years, Linda has fiercely defended the survivors and fought to establish historical clarity, and this is evident in her books. Intend to Deceive was published in February 2020. However, the book's significant contribution to literature on the subject, the start of the pandemic, prevented Linda Melvin from traveling to Rwanda for the official launch of the book. And that is why we are here gathered tonight, to honor Linda's intensive research, which resulted into this important book. And we are here tonight to also learn from her unwavering support towards establishing historical clarity about what happened here in Rwanda. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce Sandra Shenge, the Regional Program Manager at AGC Trust. Sandra is a researcher herself and passionate about the role of education in genocide denial. But before Shenge takes the stage, I would like to invite you to please rise for a minute of silence in remembrance of the victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you. Shenge, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency, First Lady, distinguished audience, all protocol reserved, good evening. I'm honored to be your moderator tonight. And thank you very much for your attention. So I will just start by saying a few words about the book that will be presented tonight and discussed with all of you. And as Brenda just said, Linda is a longtime friend of Rwanda, and a defender of historical truth. But she is first and foremost a journalist. It is her personal research, as she was working on a book for the 50th anniversary of the UN, that led her to write about Rwanda. She began research on the genocide of the Tutsi in April 1994 in New York. In a series of interviews with key Security Council ambassadors and UN officials, Melvin saw at first hand in the indifference there was and the refusal to take the slightest action over Rwanda. Her first book on Rwanda, A People Betrayed, The Role of the West in Rwanda's Genocide, was published in 2000. It was her first time Rwanda's abandonment had been Rwanda's abandonment had been described with such details. In April 2004, Linda Melvin published her second book on the genocide, Conspiracy to Murder. the Rwandan genocide. The idea behind the second book was because of access gained to files and records in Kigali that had been abandoned when the genocidaire fled the country. These documents gave a unique insight into the minds of the conspirators and the racist ideology of hot power underpinning the killings. It has now become a seminal book on the genocide. She published Intent to Deceive in February 2020. While books and articles had been written about the denial of genocide against the Tutsi, it is in the first book to do so in such detailed and well-documented manner. Using specific arguments and a large body of witness accounts and documents, Intent to Deceive, Denying the Rwandan Genocide, exposes how genocide deniers have crafted an alternative history of the Rwandan genocide. More importantly, it shows how the stories were recycled by non-Rwandan actors who have their own agenda and have contaminated academia, mainstream media, and even pop-up culture. You might have seen tweets from the Avengers themselves demanding the release of Paul Rusesabagina. The Tutsi genocide has the particularity of being openly called into question within perfectly respectable circles outside of social media and conspiracy theory blogs. Intent to Deceive is the first exhaustive analysis of the history of Tutsi genocide denial. It is an essential resource to help us understand the attacks we are facing. The lies we hear on a daily basis have an origin story. This is what the book is about. Thank you, Linda, for spending decades of your lives researching our history. To all of us here, I cannot recommend it enough. Thank you very much again, Linda. And I will now invite you to join me on the stage so that we can start first with a brief presentation of your book and then a few questions from my side before moving to the Q&A session. So I will just ask you to join me on the stage and take the seat right near me. Welcome, Linda. Please have a seat. Great. So as I have just said, we'll now give you the floor for your presentation before moving to a few questions and comments from myself and then the audience.
I will go to the podium.
Sorry?
I will go to the podium, is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Your Excellency, First Lady of Rwanda, I'm honored by your presence today. Diplomats, survivors, Rwandan friends, and friends of Rwanda. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide of December 1948 was the world's first human rights treaty, and it stood for a fundamental and important principle. Wherever genocide threatened any group or nation or people, it was a matter of concern, not just for that group, but for the whole of humanity. The Convention was the first truly universal, comprehensive, and codified protection of human rights. And while the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is simply an affirmation, the Genocide Convention is a treaty. Compliance is not a choice, it is an obligation. The Convention enshrines the promise of never again following the Holocaust in Europe, and it was intended to avoid the recurrence of state-sanctioned racist policies directed against specific groups. The Security Council of the UN is entrusted with the application of the Genocide Convention. It is the Council that has the obligation to prevent and suppress the crime. The failure by the Council in 1994 to abide by the Convention is one of the greatest and unrecognised scandals of the 20th century. That the genocide against the Tutsi was allowed to proceed unhindered, accompanied by near universal and deeply troubling indifference, is shameful. The speed, the scale, and the brutality, the failure to intervene when genocide was threatened, and the suppression of information when it was underway, is a shocking indictment of governments and individuals who could have prevented it, but chose not to do so, even when the evidence was indisputable. And while in these past 28 years, debates, studies, and resolutions have condemned the bureaucracies and systems involved, the blame has simply slipped away from those officials and politicians who made decisions that cost an unimaginable number of lives, all the while pretending that nothing could be done. It is extraordinary to recall that on April the 29th, 1994, as thousands of Tutsi were being killed, the Security Council held an 8-hour, sterile, absurd, and meaningless debate on whether to use the word genocide in relation to Rwanda. The UK ambassador, David Haney, was scathing. If ambassadors used the word genocide, he said, they would be a laughing stock. For Haney, the victims of genocide lived in the French sphere in Africa. For this reason, their suffering occurred against a backdrop of total official indifference. Indeed, the UK adopted policies that helped facilitate genocide and prolong it. Haney now sits in the House of Lords, dismissing the very suggestion that he was somehow responsible. His inaction made a mockery of the Genocide Convention, and his willful neglect seriously called into question Britain's role as one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Another powerful and privileged state was simply indifferent, the US. The US ambassador, Madeleine Albright, who last month was lauded a great stateswoman, had also argued against the use of the word genocide. She claimed later, it would be weeks before most of us understood the nature and scale of the violence. There was confusion about who was to blame for the killing. This is simply not the case, as declassified US documents later revealed. Albright was happy to blame the UN for the failure over Rwanda, used the organization to camouflage her own apathy. Both the US and the UK insisted on a ceasefire, rather like wanting Hitler to reach a ceasefire with the Jews, as one of the non-permanent council members commented. As for France, intimate with those committing the crime, its ambassador Jean-Bernard Mérimée insisted on moral equivalence and was opposed to condemning only one side. Today, 28 years later, the US and the UK continue to have problems with the word genocide. They are the only 2 members of the entire UN to refuse to comply with the official designation, genocide against the Tutsi. To have provided a UN peacekeeping mission at the outset, and then deny the means and mandate to be a serious guarantor for the Arusha Accords, sent a clear signal that the perpetrators could continue unimpeded with their genocidal conspiracy. The genocide against the Tutsi is a terrible milestone, made worse because the true nature continues to be deliberately distorted and confused. As some of you know, I have been researching and writing about the genocide against the Tutsi since April 1994. Today, I would like to share with you a milestone interview I conducted 25 years ago. In a remarkable and wide-ranging interview with His Excellency Paul Kagame in 1997, I had sat with him in the old Ministry of Defence. He had discussed the Arusha Accords and told me of the assurances he had been given by Western officials and diplomats. Even as the negotiations in Arusha were taking place, an extremist clique of Hutu power ideologues was killing Tutsi civilians in organized massacres. He was told not to worry. The whole world is watching, he was reassured by Western diplomats. He said he never missed an opportunity to issue warnings and had given information to Lieutenant General Dallaire, telling him the locations where Interahamwe were being trained, and Dallaire had flown overhead, confirming the information. When the genocide of the Tutsi began on April the 7th, His Excellency suggested to Dallaire that the UN and the RPF join forces to stop the killing of civilians. "Don't talk to me about mandate," he told Dallaire. "Just save people." He said, "I told Dallaire to secure some areas, create safe havens, and whoever comes, fight them. You have weapons. You have every right to fight if someone disrespects the flag of the UN." He asked me a question to which I had no answer. Why had the UN sent military forces if not to protect the civilian population? By the second week, the genocide against the Tutsi was obvious, he said. People were flocking to RPF bases with terrible wounds. His troops were finding massacre sites. And then he said the following: "All those in the world who claimed to be civilized were turning their backs on us, and I knew that we were alone. And this developed some contempt for people who claim to stand for values which they claim as their moral authority in this world." He went on, "I had never seen the world so hopeless and helpless. I reached the stage where I did not want them to come, because it would have been too late, and it would not have changed anything." We know that even today, more than a quarter of a century later, and with the wealth of evidence available, many deny this reality. He talked about how the Security Council had succumbed to the demands of the French. He said that the Council had made a deliberately stupid mistake by allowing French intervention. "We said we would take them on," he told me. "The French were a part of the problem. France was hand in glove with the killers." He said both the French and the génocidaires had tried to infer a second genocide had taken place of Hutu, even as the RPF liberated the country. And so it was. The noxious claim of a second genocide in 1994 remains with us today. It is one of the foundation stones of the campaign of denial. It is repeated far and wide, unchecked and unverified by a slew of Western media, academics, lawyers, and politicians. They claim this second genocide was the subject of a massive international cover-up, and yet not one shred of evidence exists of either a second genocide or a cover-up. In 1994, the claim of a second genocide was a smokescreen to distract foreign attention from the genocide against the Tutsi. And the claim is used today by the deniers who seek moral equivalence alongside their attempts to diminish the death toll, to claim the killing was in self-defense and the victims themselves to blame. The deniers want the world to believe that the genocide against the Tutsi is a matter of legitimate debate rather than the historical truth. The deniers claim the world has been fooled by an official story, the result of a financed and brilliantly executed public relations campaign engineered by the Rwandan government. Such nonsense was promoted in 2014 by the BBC in a documentary, Rwanda's Untold Story. And we saw soon after its broadcast how it was widely promoted by the deniers, thrilled that their campaign had been given the legitimacy of the UK's public service broadcaster. While the deniers each have an agenda, they do have one thing in common: a failure to understand the crime. They fail to acknowledge why the RPF fought so hard to liberate Rwanda, seeking an end to racism, hatred and division, an end to a quota system against a minority, an imposition of identity cards bearing an ethnic designation. Before the RPF liberation of Rwanda, there had existed an odious apartheid regime like that established in South Africa. The quota system was used to restrict the presence of Tutsi in education and employment, and it served to reinforce a racist ideology that two distinct ethnic groups existed. This is exactly how genocide begins, with an absurdist racist ideology that is spread via atrocity speech, using vile rhetoric and incitement to murder. It ensures the target group suffers discrimination, exclusion, marginalization, brutality, fear, terror, and death. In a harsh rebuke after the genocide was over, an international inquiry concluded that the Western press, in characterizing the genocide as tribal anarchy, was fundamentally irresponsible. The media's failure to report that genocide was taking place and thereby generate public pressure for something to be done to stop it contributed to the international indifference and inaction and to the crime itself. There are parts of the Western press that continue today to distort events. The deniers include journalists who have hidden agendas and secret backers who use misleading versions of history to smear Rwanda, to try to stop foreign aid, use fake news to try to weaken the Rwandan government. These journalists see no need to check facts, no need to conform with the principles of integrity key to the practice of journalism. To accuse a serving president of assassinating his predecessor by firing missiles at his jet would obviously require a mass of evidence, and yet no evidence exists. Instead, scientific reports are ignored, all verified evidence dismissed, and journalists rely for this accusation on a few corrupt and pathetic exiles and a discredited dossier from a French magistrate. It would be unthinkable to accuse a Western leader of such a crime with no evidence, and it is abundantly clear that one set of journalistic rules exist when reporting events in the West, and another set entirely is used when reporting Africa, when reporting Rwanda. The denial of the genocide against the Tutsi causes the gravest offense to survivors. It denies the dignity of the deceased, and it mocks those who survived. For the survivors, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi is not an event to be commemorated once a year, but it is something that they live with every single day in grief, pain, and anger. Denial ensures that genocide is a crime with no end. Thank you. Murakoze cyane.
Murakoze nawe Linda. Thank you. And join me back on the stage. So thank you very much for your presentation. A lot comes to mind after hearing you and after reading the book, but I just wanted to engage you on a few points as we open the conversation to the audience. So first of all, your book goes deep in tracking and describing the nature of the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi, and it brilliantly presents the facts. And in that, your book is really also a powerful reference for the current fight against the genocide denial we are conducting. However, as you just said in your presentation as well, and as you know, narratives tend to matter more than facts. And genocide deniers are rarely being dismissed. You just said it in the public sphere. And for instance, I will take an example from your book. You described in details the manipulation around the Bruguière investigation in chapter 7 of your book, titled Master Plot. The Bruguière report has officially been debunked. It's something that is known, but its legacy is here to stay, and it is still being considered and referenced. So I would like to discuss with you, why is Rwanda losing the ground when it comes to the narrative war?
I think, unfortunately, the denial campaign coincided with a growth in social media. I think that has played a huge part. Also, we are in what someone called yesterday a post-truth era. I don't think it will last, but we are definitely in a post-truth era. You know, it's not just the genocide against the Tutsi that is distorted. It is other things as well, other events as well suffer this. But in the case of Rwanda, it is particularly pernicious because a movement has grown up to use this distorted history to try to attack the government here, and that is its danger. I do believe, I've just said it, that there are different rules when reporting Rwanda to when reporting takes place in the West. You can say almost anything you like. We've seen that with no fact-checking. Books are now produced that are not properly prepared. There is no proper background investigation or research. You know, when reporting the assassination of Habyarimana, it would be rather like reporting the assassination of President Kennedy and ignoring all the scientific reports, all the witnesses, and just taking two people who have an alternative view for their own ends and reporting what they're saying as fact. I mean, it is absolutely ludicrous. And time will tell. It is a matter of time. And I do think that in the end, those facts that are established will win out. Truth can pass through fire and not get burned, I think. This is I have heard this many times.
Yeah, thank you so much. And in the same line, in chapter 9 of your book titled Decoding, the chapter presents several actors of denial who are still active today, and one of them is Paul Rusesabagina, whose fictional movie Hotel Rwanda is now used to attack the country, to attack Rwanda. So you may have seen the tweets by the actors from the Avengers yesterday, in the past days. So I just wanted to see with you, in the very same line of the narratives, how is the genocide denial reaching such spheres where it was until now taken out of?
I think one of the key chapters in the book is called Decoding, and it has a scene where Paul Rusesabagina speaks to an American audience of students. And his speech is denial. And yet the students are not equipped to be able to ascertain that. I am absolutely astonished that the facts of this case are just so completely ignored. You know, I interviewed UN peacekeepers, military observers, who were at the Hotel des Mille Collines. The consensus is that Paul Rusesabagina His role in that hotel was as the eyes and ears of Hutu power, that the people in the hotel had visas and had to be saved because the whole world was watching the Hotel des Mille Collines, whereas 5 minutes down the road, there was no such attention for those families at Sainte-Famille. In 2008, Paul Rusesabagina came to London and appeared in a Westminster Magistrates' Court to give evidence to try to prevent the extradition of 5 alleged genocidaires who are still at large in the UK. And the magistrate determined that he was no more than a proponent of Hutu power, that by his testimony you could tell that this man was a Hutu power ideologue. I wrote this in my book. These are the facts of the case. Mm-hmm. And when Hollywood decided to continue in the face of all these known facts to support him, I wrote letters. I wrote to CNN, I wrote to The Guardian, I wrote to Channel 4 News, and the facts just did not seem to matter to them. This is extraordinary to me. I'm an old-fashioned journalist. I learnt my trade on the Sunday Times newspaper. And to see journalists dismiss facts in this way is quite extraordinary.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Yeah, and another point I wanted to engage you on is about the importance of vocabulary. You've said it. The UN has recognized the official denomination of the genocide against the Tutsi. And as you said it in your presentation, so many countries in the Western world are refusing to use it. And I wanted to engage you around the why of that. So what is their excuse? And more specifically, could the UN do something about it? As you debrief that, also, you could maybe tell us more about the dynamics of the genocide denial in the UK.
Well, the 2 states that refused to recognize the designation genocide against the Tutsi are the US and the UK, for reasons best known only to themselves. I cannot understand it. They talk of other victims, but they fail to recognize the Genocide Convention. The other victims did not die in a genocide. The Tutsi died in a genocide. The other victims died because they were in the way or they stood up against the Hutu power ideologues. So why on earth the UK and the US is resisting this is anybody's guess, and there's a lot of research to do, I think, to find out. But it is to our shame. There is a tsunami of denial in the UK currently. Nothing could have prepared me for the book by Michaela Wrong. I'm sure you know of it here. Yeah. It is replete with error and denial, and yet received reviews widely in the British press. I don't think this stage of this history will last. I think that eventually the truth will out, as I said previously.
Mm-hmm. Great. And one last point I would like to converse about with you is, you have said and you continue saying that facts are the best way to fight denial, and that we should not speak with deniers. So facts are available. Nothing is hidden. We know that, but deniers are thriving. What do you think should be done by the government of Rwanda and Rwandans at large, and especially survivors' organizations? And as we debrief that, I wanted also to look at particularly there is a new Rwandan High Commissioner in London, and a new British High Commissioner recently arrived in Kigali. So I wanted to see with you, what can they do to improve the Rwanda-UK relations with regards to this specific question of genocide denial?
Well, first of all, I hope they read my book. I hope that they take the time to actually study and understand that in refusing to recognize the designation, they contribute to the campaign of denial. There's no doubt that they are contributing to the campaign of denial. And they should know, and they should be told. It should be made quite clear. I'm also encouraged by the numbers now of survivor testimonies. I've said this before, that survivor testimonies will destroy the lies and the denial. It's very, very important that much is recorded, that archives are preserved. And you know that research continues. There's an awful lot more still to do. And I intend to carry on with my work, yes.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. So research, preserving the memory through testimonies, and reading your book, obviously. I agree with you. Thank you so much. Your Excellency, First Lady, distinguished audience, we would like now to open the floor to the audience for your comments, questions, and anything you'd like to bring to the conversation with Linda tonight. Yeah, so we have someone towards the back there. You just say your name and give us your comment.
Is it working? Hello?
Can I borrow your pen?
Yes. Thank you very much, Linda, for your presentation. As always, for your solidarity with the genocide survivors. My question is about the designation of the UK and the United States as having been indifferent in 1994 and their attitude today. So I think that today, when you look back, you can say that by their continued denial or their support, indirectly or directly, to the denial campaign, that they are furthering their position of 1994. So if then we called them being indifferent, we can't call them so today. They are active participants. So for me, my understanding of your presentation and what you've concluded with, I deduce that by refusing to designate the terminology of genocide against the Tutsi, this refusal is somewhat equivalent to the refusal to intervene. So in 1994, the refusal to intervene meant that they sided with the decision to execute. They sided with the perpetrators of the genocide. And they may have done so out of indifference at the time, but the fact is that the failure to intervene, despite the capacity to do so, was a decision to side with the perpetrators. And today, the decision to refuse to use the terminology genocide against the Tutsi, despite the facts demonstrated without by all standards, from the testimonies of the survivors, from the international instruments of the ICTR, and so on. So I am the view, and you can help me illuminate this. I am of the view that we should stop conceiving the Americans and the British as passive bystanders. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I am Lonzen Rugira.
Lonzen Rugira. Oh, yeah, I was about to ask you. Thank you, Lonzen. So if you allow me, Linda, we'll maybe take a series of 3 questions and comments before getting back to you. Yes. There's someone on this side? Yes.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm Remy Chokote. I'm Cameroonian by birth, German by citizenship, and I teach African literatures in Austria. And I'm here to do documentary research on the genocide against the Tutsi. Thank you so much for the fantastic work you've been doing. It's not a question, it's a request. You ended by saying that what needs to be done is more research, writing against the denial. Now, would you consider, as part of your legacy, holding the hand of a young person from Rwanda and teach this person how to do the kind of research you're doing, so that a young person from Rwanda may also learn from you and, participate to this kind of research. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarv. Yes, there is one third comment over here, and then we come back to Linda. Honorable Bamhorichi.
Thank you, Linda, for the good work you have done since '94. My question, actually I have to thank you for the work you have done, and I have one request. It seems like a question or a wish. These days, there is a system of taking the book into audiobook. I'm asking if there is a plan to do audiobook for a young generation, because it's good for young people to read, but we are seeing them not reading, and I'm sure they need this good message. If there is a way of doing that audiobook together, or you with your team, if we can help, or if you can do it, it will help. Also, if we can translate this into Kinyarwanda or French, I think it will help. So about denials, I was about asking how you see the voice of perpetrators who are in prison, who are outside here in this fight. How do you see their voice? You have done research, and locally we are doing our own research at our own capacity. I'm sure answering the question of my fellow, we will see how you can boost our knowledge of doing research. We do have people outside here who are willing to tell the story, who have already told the story, who are perpetrators of the genocide. I really want to see, in your view, how you value the message of the perpetrators in this fight against the deniers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable. So let's maybe come back to Linda for comments and reaction to these first questions, and then we come back to the audience.
Okay. Lausanne, from Pan-African Review, I think. Yes. I have a piece in your journal currently on this very subject, so it is an important issue. The Charter starts with "we, the peoples of the United Nations," but it seems that we do not have a voice. You know, it is up to the populations of the US and the UK to challenge their governments on this. You know, there are many organizations in the US and in the UK that were created to commemorate the Holocaust. I think they should join in with this. I think that it should be of concern to them as well, that the UK is failed in '94 to abide by the Genocide Convention, and fails today to properly recognize what happened here. So I think a campaign in each country is called for to try to change this. I also think there could be some sort of initiative at the UN that these states should be shamed before the General Assembly. They are the only two states to refuse to recognize the designation. I don't know who's the General Assembly president now, but perhaps there could be an initiative. Yes, I hope so. Teaching here, I would be absolutely honored to teach Rwandan journalists. I would like to teach a course on investigative journalism here, so if that can be arranged, I'd be really pleased to do so. The voice of the perpetrators. I believe we do hear the voice of the perpetrators. I think we hear the voices of the perpetrators who are currently in prison. I don't know whether you've read the description in Intent to Deceive of how they are housed in prison. You know, they have all the facilities, and I think that they themselves could be part of the denial campaign. You know, they have computers, they have access to the outside world. As you know, the ICTR, former ICTR President Theodore Meron allowed the chief propagandist of Hutu power, Ferdinand Nahimana, to be released, which was absolutely scandalous. Yeah. So I think we do hear from them. I think they are part of the campaign. I don't know whether you meant whether we hear the voice of the perpetrators by interviewing them. I think that, yes, we do. I think that they have had more than enough exposure. But that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't carry on interviewing them, although history has shown us that génocidaires seem incapable of any remorse at all. You know, they are so infected by their racist ideology that it seems an impossible task to me to persuade them otherwise.
Great, brilliant. Thank you very much, Linda. So I think we have time to go for a second session of questions and comments.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Could I just say, yes, there are no plans currently for an audio book. It is a brilliant idea. I'd be really pleased. Yeah. And the day that my book, any one of my books is translated into Kinyarwanda, I will celebrate. It is something that I've wanted for a very long time. Yeah. And if that could be organized, I'd be really pleased. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have a second series of questions. We had, yes, of course, Your Excellency. Yeah. Did you hear?
No, I'm sorry.
So, yeah, what Honorable Bamurichi was meaning was about the genocidaires to counter, to have accountability about them. What is the role of that aspect in the historical in fighting against
what the accountability denial of the genocidaire?
Yes. Yeah. Did you hear? Yeah. So what he meant was how could be used the testimonies of the genocidaire to counter the narratives, the genocide denial.
Yes.
Yeah. What is the place of or the role of that
of the perpetrators?
Yes, in that aspect.
I think the perpetrators play a major role in this. I think that, you know, their narrative is still promoted far and wide, not just by the genocidaires themselves.
So,
I think I can be clear on this.
Go on, sorry.
We do have people who are denying genocide outside here.
Yes.
And we do have people who committed genocide here in Rwanda.
Yes.
Who accept their role in the genocide.
Right.
I was asking,
yes,
how do you see, in your view, their role in this fight?
Their role is enormous. Those who are willing to speak out. Oh, absolutely, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, their role is huge, yes, of course, and extremely valuable. Yes, not to be discounted at all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Brilliant, thank you so much. So you have, yes, sir?
Yes. Building, Linda, on what you just shared with us, on the fact that, sorry, excuse me. Rudat Simburgwa, Albert. Sorry. You pointed at something very important, the time we are living in. I mean, this happened last century, and today we are in a digital transformation of the global society. Post-truth, non-factual. And the speed that it takes, and the magnitude of it is incredible. You seemed confident that this will end sometimes, but all I see more, I'm a bit maybe in a hurry, but to see it ending, but I don't see it ending, I just see it swelling. And I'm wondering, and then this thing also to say, in this time, in the academic, what we have seen also in the UK, to see the Cambridge, or was it Oxford? I can't remember. Cambridge. Giving a floor to, and having a publisher going for, without going through the classic scholar academic rules of facts and checks and getting too deeper before you give the floor to someone who just invents things or, in fact, amplifies genocide denial. Like we have seen this Judy Reaver interventions and you see that there is a bigger resistance in French academics and scholars than a total, in fact, even support beyond this failure of the academics that you will see then the media and I would say in general the Anglophone almost WASP, I would say, of support of this genocide denial. And with such I would say emotional that it is like really they're after a beast that they have to just have killed. I'm more worried about that I don't see the end really of that. I feel like we are just getting into a time and a space where we have to deal with that and where we also have to have a way to counter that. It's more of my what I believe about what is happening and what we are doing right now.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe two more before coming back to you, Linda. I had seen two hands on this side. Yes, Ambassador Nsengimana, and then, so maybe start Paul Rikesha, you, sir, and then Ambassador Nsengimana. So we take these three first, and then if we are allowed to have another session, we'll take the last ones. So Rikesha, you go first, and then.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Linda, for your presentation. Thank you for the great work you did. I read your book. And in your book, there's a chapter called Crime Scene, where you talk about how France, during the process of establishing the ICTR, imposed the court's jurisdiction to be about the period of from 1st January 1994 to 31st December of that year. And the implication of that imposition is that the judges couldn't really go beyond search for the preparation of the genocide, including all the process of genocide from 1959, all the persecution, the harassment, humiliation, labeling, anti-Tutsi propaganda, anti-Tutsi killings, and kind of France prevented that work of recognizing the preparation of genocide. And my question is, now we have the rapport de Klerk and the rapport Muse from both governments. France is no longer the obstacle. Can we imagine a scenario where we can say we can have re-judgment of the genocide, or at least the future indictments of genocide perpetrators, that element of genocide preparation be included, be considered in light of the recent reports that we have now? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rikesha. We have someone on that side. Yes, sir?
Hi, Linda, thanks as ever for the grounded work. My name is Charles Mironko. I'm a genocide scholar, and my focus is on the political and social mechanism of mass murder, the case of Rwanda. But what I want to talk about today, kwibuka twiyubaka. So the commemoration, I suggest my fellow Rwandans, it is to be a process, not an event. Mm-hmm. We can learn from the Holocaust, kids as 5, 3, 4 years, they will be there talking. We can publish books, but we can also profit our oral history to make it alive by once upon a time there was this, by talking, by sensitizing every day. There are books there against, wherever the government of the Rwanda is at, but universities will take researchers, the students, sujet de mémoire. This is a topic, your book, this is what they've written, you have the data more than anybody else, and then we keep on doing that. So the message to my fellow Rwandans, let's make genocide, Stanton said it, the stages of genocide. Denial, it is there to stay. We live with it. It's the last stage of genocide, and it's on a daily basis. Of course, it will be fought like that, But in the post-genocide Rwanda, we need, when I read kwiyubaka, I read social construct. So how do we keep on endlessly, at all levels, I know they're in the schools and everything, to build such social construct that it is every time they say never again, so that it can be real. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mironko, for your contribution. So we had said Ambassador Nsengimana for just a last one for this session.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, for your books on the genocide against Tutsi. You have been an eloquent voice telling the truth about the genocide, and we are grateful for it. I want just to hear your advice. The Carson UN International Inquiry Report is clear on the lack of political will in the UN Security Council, mainly from the 3 permanent members, USA, UK, and France. 28 years after the genocide, the same lack of political will continues, mainly for USA and UK in refusing the right naming of what happened in Rwanda in 1994. As a specialist of the genocides in general and of the genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda, can you please, as well, a special investigative journalist on genocide and the international law, do you see a possible way to make mainly these countries who are refusing 28 years after to name the genocide against Tutsi according to reality, do you see any possible way to make them accountable? It is just to seek your advice about it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ambassador. Let's come back to Linda for this series of questions.
Yes, the first one there. I just wanted to say to you, don't be downhearted and don't give up. You know, the tsunami that we face in the UK of denial currently, at one point in France, it was just as bad. You know, at the beginning, I mean, France was intimately involved with the génocidaire, and thanks to the work that has been carried out in France, where I think the genocide against the Tutsi has a much higher profile. You know, it's not just David Haney who believes that Rwanda was in the sphere of, you know, this old colonial attitude. I think that that is an old colonial attitude that is with us today. So there is a sort of dismissive attitude. And I do want to say, and I think this answers some other questions too, we need a trial in the UK of the génocidaire at large. If we had a trial in the UK of those génocidaires, and it's not just those 5, I understand that we have several hundred. If they were apprehended and put on trial, then I think the public would understand a bit better. At the moment, they don't. The public really is extremely badly informed on what happened here. And partly I do blame those organizations that promote, that fight against the denial of the Holocaust. I think they should join in with this, because after all, it's the Genocide Convention itself that is under attack here. Okay, so I don't think we should give up. I get very down. It's very difficult sometimes when you think you're just sort of overwhelmed with it, but we must keep working. Paul, you talked about the restrictive period at the ICTR, that it ran from January to January. You know, I cannot tell you. I've read the debates in the council that were held when, in November 1994, the ICTR was created. You know, it was created with such reluctance. It was only shame at inaction that forced them really into the creation of this tribunal. And there was reluctance afterwards to spend money on it. There were constant complaints about how much it cost. So that was a real problem. Also, you know, the core group is several hundred, and yet the ICTR has only put on trial and some 62, I think. So, in a sense, it wasn't a job well done, was it? Although it has provided us, I think, with some invaluable testimony and proof. You talk about Duclair and Muse, and yes, that helps enormously. But I do think that we do need a trial. I think perhaps in the US or definitely in the UK. 28 years later, you ask, how can they be held accountable, these states? Well, I will hold them accountable. I hope other people too will hold them accountable. I hope we never let them rest. I hope we shame them forever and keep going with this until the time comes when they fully realize the crime here, the magnitude of it, and what happened. We must never relax in our endeavors, ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. So, in the interest of time, I think we have to hand back the floor to Brenda. We have time for another session of questions. So I will invite, first of all, questions. Just a point of information: Linda speaks French, so if you'd like to ask your question in French and Kinyarwanda also, feel free to do so. Secondly, I would also like to encourage women in the room, so that we can hear more your voices. So I can see one hand from the back, and then one woman, 2, 3 with Mr. Ndahiro. So yes, go ahead first.
Thank you very much, Linda, for the work you've been doing over the past 28 years. My name is Bruce Inwadi Murangira, and my question goes a little bit back on the convention. Earlier in your remarks, you talked about it being not just an affirmation, but a treaty which makes it somehow legally binding, and that's a little bit what I would like to talk about. Since its adoption and ratification in 1948, we've seen the genocide in Cambodia, we've seen a genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and we've all seen what is happening currently with the Rohingyas and the Uyghurs and the other minorities around the world, which more or less can be qualified or have been qualified by different international organizations, including UN organizations, as genocide. But we still see a refusal to act and to bring a stop to those crimes and those mass atrocities. So my question is, how exactly legally binding is this treaty in the face of its repeated failures? And what, in your opinion, I know maybe it might be more of a question on the legal side, but I believe you have a valuable opinion to offer on this. How can we make sure that the people who are active in that refusal to act, such as David Hanning, whom you talked about, who's enjoying his time as an MP in the House of Lords, Madeleine Albright, who was widely hailed as a champion of human rights upon her death a few weeks ago, and others can be truly held accountable in a way that is maybe beyond just shaming them. How can you make sure that this convention really becomes something that leads to actionable points whenever we see mass atrocities and genocide happening around the world? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Yes, so from the lady in the back, before coming to the phone.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Linda, for all your work. My name is Véronique Mbaye. So my question is, there seems to be a bit of intentionality.
Excuse me, could you remove your mask?
Yes,
we can't hear you very well.
Sorry.
Thank you.
So there seems to be a little bit of intentionality about the timing that some of the fake news and the misinformation about Rwanda comes out. At this point, it almost feels like you can predict at which point a wave of misinformation is going to be shed. For example, this period, which is a particularly sensitive period for us, or when exciting things are about to be unrolled. And that gives the impression that the door is purposely closed. The door to the truth, the door to exchange based on facts. I've seen so many times academics point detailed, explained, researched information about why all these theories are baseless, factless, evidenceless. And those publications, those articles, those discussions are purposely avoided by the people that I believe you said you even reached out to, you wrote letters to asking not to spread these harmful truths. And I'm sure you were met with silence, which again, seems intentional. So my question is, do you think that there is value to ignoring the intentional closing of the door in your face and attempting to get to these people? And if so, what is advice that you would have in going over this resistance and having your voice heard and having your facts heard regardless? Thank you again.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So let's come now to the front, to Mr. Tom Dairo.
Thanks very much, Linda, for your good work. I read your book, and I have a question which I have been asking myself, and I'm posing this to you. When the likes of Bagosora, Nahimana, and others justify genocide, one against the Tutsi, you would understand them. But when you read the texts of Serge de Souter, this Belgium, John Philpott and his brother Robin, Helmut Strizek, Judy River, you just find that they are just like Rwandan genocidaires with the white skins. What motivates them to do that? I'm asking myself that question, and I'm posing this to you. And do you find any, the second one, do you find any relationship when the United States refuses to use the term genocide against the Tutsi? It's among the countries that resisted in the drafting of the Genocide Convention. If you read the minutes in 1947, 1948, before it was adopted by the UN. And 40 years after it took them 40 years to ratify the convention with the reservations. Why do you think this happened? Is there any relationship between what happened at that time and what is happening to the genocide against the Tutsi? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Ndahiro. So, Linda, back to you.
On the convention, legally binding or not, and you will find lawyers will argue all night about whether or not the Genocide Convention is legally binding. You will always find a lawyer to say it's not, and you will also find an international lawyer to say it is, and they can argue all they like. Because what the Genocide Convention enshrines is a moral duty to act. Whether or not it's legal, and I argue that it is, I'm one of those who believes that it is, there is a moral duty to act. How this helps in getting states to actually recognize that in the Council, and the Council is central to the application, is very difficult. But I would suggest that if someone, because of their inaction in '94, had lost their reputation or lost their pension and were held properly accountable for what happened, and I'm including in this officials in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Colin Keating from New Zealand, who was the president of the Council in '94, who did all he could to try to turn the Council round. He thought that every single state on the Council at that time should have held a public inquiry into what happened. You know, in the UK, we should have had hearings. We should have had a committee of the House of Commons to find out exactly what happened and why our own government turned its back on the convention. And I would suggest that had that happened, then perhaps it may be different today. Perhaps not, but it is one way forward. Accountability is really important. You know, it's what journalists are meant to do, to hold all authority, no matter what authority. And this includes the UN, the Security Council, and our own governments to account. This should have been the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, should have been the defining moment of their careers. And yet I'm sure that many of you, when you read the obituary of Madeleine Albright, there was barely a mention, and yet it was the most important aspect of her career, I would suggest, and as you know, she went on to become Secretary of State. That brilliant question from the back about fake news, and we can, I think, predict when the genocidaire and the denialists will pop their heads over the parapet and begin to throw mud at us. I think we should be prepared for it. Yeah. You know, there's a suggestion that, and perhaps the Aegis Trust would like to take this up, that every genocide museum, and I include the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Aegis Trust in Nottingham, our Imperial War Museum, every single one should have an exhibit on denial. There should be an explanation in each museum on why denial exists, and it is part. It's an integral part of the crime itself. It will never end. And I think that should be explained. Tom, what motivates them? I think each one has a different motivation. I think it's racism, it's hatred, it's money, it's careerism, it's opportunism. Who knows? But each single one is different and dangerous and should be challenged. For each article that appears, there should be letters, each and every one, so that there's no doubt that what this publisher or what this newspaper editor, but you know, newspaper editors are so confused. I don't think they can tell genocide denial from the truth anymore because there has been so much of it. It did take 40 years for the US to ratify the Genocide Convention, and only then because I think it wanted to attract, the president wanted to attract the Jewish vote. And I understand the reservations. Why this was, I have no idea, but I do hope that somebody at this very moment is working on it, because it's a very important question. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Linda, for the great work in putting together the book, for the wonderful insights shared tonight in this conversation, and thanks to the audience for your very remarkable contributions as well. Your Excellency First Lady, distinguished people in the audience, please join me as we thank Linda for her time tonight.
Thank you very much. Murakoze Chane.
Murakoze Chane, Linda.
Murakoze Chane.
Thank you. So we'll now hand back the floor to Brenda.
Thank you so much, Linda and Shenye, for an insightful, educative, and moving session. If you could take back your seats, thank you.
Can we go back to our seats?
Do you want me to do?
As they take back their seats, I would like to personally extend a gratitude to Linda Melvin for honoring the memory of our loved ones whose lives were cut short in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi through her work. From the discussions and the conversations, Intent to Deceive is a groundbreaking expose on the many faces of the genocide denier and the motivation of deniers. But it also provides with us ample information on the tools of how we can fight the genocide deniers. So I encourage everyone to buy the book and read it. So Your Excellency, First Lady, if you would allow me, I will introduce Paul Rukesha, who is going to tell us how Linda's work inspires him and helps him in his work on a daily basis. Paul Rukesha, for the last 12 years, has been working, coordinating major projects, including Genocide Archive of Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Your Excellency, First Lady, honorable ministers, distinguished audience, I first thank Linda Melvin for the great work and the book that she wrote. And for the first time I met Linda Melvin, it was at the memorial, Kigali Genocide Memorial. But it was virtually. I started working with Aegis Trust at Kigali Genocide Memorial in the archive. And my work consisted of collecting testimonies from survivors. I personally interviewed more than 100 testimonies of survivors, life histories of survivors. And each testimony can make one hour and a half. I also interviewed more than 30 testimonies of perpetrators. Honorable Minister was mentioning their role in informing us how the genocide was prepared and executed. I also interviewed more than 50 rescuers, people we call abarinzi b'igihango, and other experienced groups, elders, people who teach us the genesis of genocide, how the genocide started. And then I came across a 3-minute-long video where Linda Melvin was explaining about her book and about how the international community had abandoned the Rwandans. It wasn't until 2017 when we met in the conference in Ottawa. We were invited to speak in a Carleton University by Professor Alan Thompson, but Linda was online. I was there physically. On the panel, we were 4 of us, Linda, me, Professor Philip Lechens, and another journalist, whom I learned later from my friend Albert Rudatsimburga that he was not a journalist, Anjan something, I don't remember the other. Yes. And you can understand the debate was heated. And Professor Lechens tried to intimidate us, the Rwandans who were in the room, and also to intimidate her by saying that Linda Melvin benefited from the Rwandan government by receiving the Abarinzi b'igihango award. And also he talked about us as trolls of Rwandan government. And Professor Alan Thompson had tried to introduce us by saying we are not related to the Rwandan government, but I said in my introduction that even though I don't work for the Rwandan government, I can stand by my government because I was seeing the Canadian flag in the room, which means the university, the professors, the students were, standing for their country. I said, also, I will not speak on behalf of the government, but I will stand. If you say something that is unfair to the government, I will respond. And Linda Melvin really demolished Philip Lechens, who was presenting the 6 pillars of RPF, the so-called 6 pillars of RPF lies. Since 1990, he was describing the RPF as being the most talented in lying, in spreading propaganda, and he presented 6 pillars. And Linda Melvin really demolished one by one of those six pillars. And then came the turn of Mr. Anjan, with a litany of insults, saying that the Rwandan government was really murderous, autocratic, all those insults. But politely, Linda Melvin deconstructed all the narrative from both men. And later on, when we were at the dinner, I approached the Professor Philip Lechens, asking him 2 scenarios, because Linda Melvin had really empowered me to confront Professor Philip Lechens. I asked him, because he's so fond of labeling Rwandans, Hutus, Tutsis, in the government, Hutus are 20%, Tutsis are 80%. And I asked him, Philip Lechens, you present genocide as the result of the anger of the Hutus, and all Hutus participated in the genocide because they were angry as a reaction of the shooting down of President Habyarimana. I told him, let's imagine a scenario before the Belgian and and Germans came. Where, as you suggest, Tutsi are, 14 or 10%, let's say 10%, as his friend Naimana Ferdinand suggests. And the Hutus are 90%. And let's suggest those Hutus have had a conscience of being Hutus, and they were oppressed by the Tutsis. What prevented them from murdering all the Tutsis before the white people came in Rwanda? If really that oppression existed, what prevented them? And what made all Rwandans to respond to the king's call to attack together to neighboring kingdom? Going together from four corners of the country, responding to the call of kings, Rwabugiri and Ndabarasa and other kings. What made them responding if they were really hating each other? And he had nothing to say. And I asked him another scenario, saying, if you suggest that all Hutus participated in genocide because they were angry, why are you again saying that RPF killed innocent civilians, Hutu civilians, while you still claiming that those people, you have already militarized those civilians? You are making them military targets. And then you come back and then you say, the RPF killed tens of thousands of Hutu civilians. Can you try to make sense of that? And he did not have an answer from those two scenarios, those answers. And later, the reason why I talked about the second scenario is that in Linda's book, there is a passage where the prosecuting lawyer, Drew White, was confronting Colonel Bagosora, asking him, because Bagosora was defending himself, saying the government, the military forces had nothing to do with the genocide, with the killing Tutsis. And he said it was all by the ordinary Hutu citizens, because they were angry. It was a spontaneous reaction to the shooting of Habyarimana. And Drew White really made these comments that I want to read. She said, you claim to align yourself with Hutu people, but at the same time, you blame them entirely for what happened in Rwanda in 1994. You say the ordinary citizen who took up arms and killed Tutsis in a spontaneous event had nothing to do with leadership and nothing to do with organization. I'm suggesting to you that perhaps it's time for you to free the Hutu citizens of Rwanda from the burden of all the blame that you put on them. It is on page 85 in the chapter called The Denial. And this really inspired me and makes me think that, what I had used to confront Professor Philip Lenchens really comes back in your book, and I was happy for that. Also I would address fellow survivors of the genocide and other ordinary Rwandans to really read books, because the denial, even the preparation of the genocide was in the books, and the denial also is in the books. If we don't read books, we don't get facts well, and then we don't have weapons to fight against genocide denial. So I would encourage you to read books by our friends, like Linda Melvin, but also books by our enemies. You need to know, you need to be informed what the enemy is plotting. So we have a gift shop at the memorial. We have books. Please, I invite you to come and buy books and read books. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I would now like to invite Linda Melvin to tell us what is on her heart right now, and to, yes, thank you, Linda, please.
First of all, First Lady, I am greatly honoured by your presence at this book launch. Thank you so much for coming. Murakoze Chani, thank you. Thank you. I would also like to thank you all for the launch of this book. It means a great deal to me, thank you. I would also like to thank the people in Rwanda who over the course of 28 years have helped and informed my work, responding to sometimes unreasonable requests for help at crucial moments, and for your insights, for your memories, and for your wisdom during many long and detailed interviews. It has been a privilege to know you and this remarkable country that has risen so spectacularly from the ashes. I would also like to acknowledge the great honour accorded to me by His Excellency Paul Kagame, who gave authorization all those years ago to allow me to consult the numerous and precious collection of state archives here in Rwanda. This was unprecedented in my journalistic experience anywhere in the world. And I could not have written these 3 books without you, and this has been the privilege of my life. And finally, I would like to thank you all for your generous, kind and warm hospitality over these many, many years. Murakoze Chani.
Your Excellency First Lady, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, this marks the end of the book launch. We would like to thank you for honoring us with your presence, but I would like to particularly like to express my gratitude to Your Excellency the First Lady for your continued support for and patronage of literary arts. As a young person, I'm often moved and inspired by your passion for words and their power to impact change. And I know I'm not the only one. So this comes to the end of... So this marks the end of our book launch event. I would like to encourage you to buy books. And if you want, Linda is going to be there to sign them. Thank you. Have a good evening.